This is a video of my build of a spalted maple coffee table measuring approximately 39 inches long, 18 inches wide, 17 inches high. It has a full-length drawer which is about 9 inches deep and 7 inches high. I was attempting to have somewhat of a mid-century modern look with simple lines. As you'll notice, the grain on the side panels or apron are running vertical. I thought this would also add to the eye appeal. My first task was to select the panels that I would use to make the top. Spalted maple is essentially regular maple, which is allowed to start decaying or sometimes has been impregnated with a fungus. This fungus causes the wood to become quite light and soft in places, and what I would call brittle, are susceptible to breaking or cracking along the grain line. After rough cutting the 3 boards that will make the top, I took them to the planer, planed them down to 3/4 of an inch, and then cut them to the final dimensions. I always use biscuits when gluing together panels like this, and I think especially in this case because of the nature of the wood I'm using. I'm using Titebond 1 glue because I think it dries closer to the color of the wood. I'm using just 3 number 20 biscuits at each joint. I use cawls at each end just to keep the panel flat. And finally, a 3rd clamp opposing the other 2 on the ends. While the top panel is drying, I turn my attention to the apron or the side skirts around the top. The apron is approximately 7 inches high, and I'll do the 2 ends in one glue up and then cut this member in half, thus giving me 2 sides that are almost identical. For the front apron, or the side opposite the drawer, I'm making the slats narrower so that I can stack them randomly when I make the apron. Because of the number of pieces, that is the glue joints, I decided to do the front apron in multiple steps, allowing the pieces to set up before I glued them together. While the initial front apron pieces were setting up, I took the side apron plank to the table saw and split it into the 2 sides. After the glue set up on the initial sections of the front panel, I went back and glued those 2 sections together. Again, I'll set these aside so the glue will set up, and I'll move over and start in on the legs. With the top panel out of the clamps, I take it to the drum sander to clean up the glue squeeze out and get it to final thickness. After cleaning up the surfaces of the top panel, I take it to the table saw and cut it to final dimensions, cutting a little bit off of all 4 sides. With the front apron section all glued up, I get one good clean straight edge on the long side. Then I run it through the drum sander to clean up the glue squeeze out and get it to final thickness. Then back to the table saw to get it down to the final dimensions, height and length. Although this is a small, narrow piece, it shows you how brittle this material is. As a result of the inherent weakness of the spalted maple, I put a 3/4 inch backing board on the back side of the apron, in this case poplar. I then used the poplar backing board to fasten and construct the apron itself. In gluing the poplar backing board to the spalted maple apron, I used sawdust to keep the two pieces from slipping and sliding while I glued them up. After the glue dried up between the backing board and the sides, I was able to screw and glue the apron together. I used a spacer board to keep it square. I made a full-scale drawing of the leg configuration that I wanted, and then I used a T-bevel to duplicate that angle at the table saw. First, I cut the cross member for the legs, marked the legs so that I could reassemble the matching pieces, and then cut the legs to length. Once I got the leg pieces cut, it was time to join them together. I'm using 3/4 inch dowels at each joint. You never want to throw away any of your scraps until your project is complete. Here I'm using the cutoffs from the legs as cauls so that I can get a good clamping pressure. Now with the leg members all glued up, it's time to start shaping them. I start out at the drill press to get the tight inner radius. Then over to the bandsaw to cut the angle in the leg itself, meeting with the inside radius of this tight curve. From the bandsaw, I go to the oscillating belt sander to get the final shape I'm looking for. Essentially, every edge got a pronounced 3/8 inch round over top and bottom, giving it somewhat of a bullnose appearance. The cross members that connect the legs together flare out at the same angle that the legs. Using the T-bevel, I set the saw blade so that I can trim off the edge of the cross members accordingly. The cross members will get screwed to the bottom of the table. I should have drilled the counterbore for the screws before I cut the taper. As you can see, I was able to use, again, the cutoffs from the legs to support the member. Here I am assembling the cross members and the legs to the apron itself. You would have thought that the tabletop would have fit directly onto the legs and the cross member, but in fact the legs are not even attached to the cross member. The legs are glued to the side of the table and then for added strength screwed from the inside. Once the basic carcass for the table is finished, I can now start in on the drawer. The first step is to temporarily install the undermount drawer slides. These are Bloom soft close. This allows me to get an accurate dimension of the drawer width. One of the tricks to get a good drawer is to make sure that all of the members are the same size and thickness and that none of the boards are warped or wonky. As you can see, this board is twisted and needs to be flattened. I do this by securing it to a flat sled with hot glue and then running it through the planer. I now have all of the members planed down to the same thickness, in this case a 1/2 inch, as well as some sample pieces so that I can set up the dovetail jig. I then cut all of the members to the same width, or in this case the height of the drawer. Then it's crucial that all of the members have square ends and the opposing sides be exactly the same length. Once I have all of the drawer parts ready and the dovetail jig set up, it's a matter of just cutting the pins and the tails. Now that the dovetail joints are complete, I can cut a 1/4 inch dado along the bottom edge so that the drawer bottom can slide in. In order to hide the dado from view, I plunge the router bit into 2 of the sides. With the drawer sides and the dado for the drawer bottom cut, I can now cut the bottom to length and width. Before I can assemble the drawer, I have to cut this little notch on either side of the bottom of the back panel so that it will clear the undermount slides. And then finally, here I am assembling the drawer. These plugs will be sanded smooth once the glue is dried. For gluing up the drawer front, I'm using a different technique than I did for the other apron sides. I'm going to glue this up all at once. I put down some wax paper on the assembly table and will clamp the drawer front flat against the tabletop itself. To cut the drawer front to size, I temporarily install the drawer itself. I'm measuring the drawer front here. I will cut it a little bit long. The drawer front overlaps the side aprons and the edge will get a round over to match the rest of the edges of the table. And finally, I glue the drawer front on with the drawer in place. Of course, there's still a lot of sanding and shaping to get that drawer to fit just right. I normally only do this on outdoor furniture, but because of the nature of this material, I'm applying an epoxy to the bottom of the legs to help keep from chipping out and breaking the legs on skidding it across the floor. I'm spraying multiple, that means 7 or 8 coats of General Finishes clear overcoat, a water base. I'm using a water base for multiple reasons. One, it's easier to clean up, and mostly because it will not provide an amber tone to the finish. After the finish dries, I reinstall the hardware, insert the drawer, make sure it fits, and then flip it over and attach the top. And that finishes the table, folks. As always, I appreciate you watching, and happy woodworking.